Hello and welcome to Think Watercolour. I'm Paul Webber and I'll be working from this reference photo for today's demonstration. This is a photograph of the old castle ruins at St Andrews in Scotland, with a view across the bay. There's a long beach over to the left there. That's just in front of the old course, the home of golf at St Andrews. One of the things I will change is I'm going to make the sky a little bit more dramatic. I think this is a little bit flat and uninteresting for a painting. It's a nice photograph, and from a compositional point of view it's nicely divided. You have the castle tower 1/3 across and the horizon's roughly 1/3 up. So it should make quite a reasonable composition. So let's get started. I'm going to start with the sky, so I'm going to wet the paper down to the horizon line. This is a Cotman 3/4 inch flat. Doesn't need to be too wet, just wet enough to be able to fade the clouds a little bit. I've just loosely sketched in the image. Just go over the hills a little bit. Won't matter if the clouds bleed into the hills. Don't need it too wet. So while that's soaking in a little bit, I'm going to mix up some grey blue. I'll use cobalt blue, and a touch of Windsor red, just to make it a nice purpley grey. Got to remember this is going to dry lighter, so need to make it fairly strong in the first place. I'm going to have some clouds scudding across the sky, disappearing into the background, so just let these bleed in. Thinner gaps between the clouds as they're further away. Just keep it fluid and simple. Slightly darker at the top here, where it's closer to us, to create that sort of aerial perspective feel. Some over here. Try and keep some of the white, not too much, just enough. And blend them over the horizon. Maybe a few more lines in there. cobalt blue and just add some cerulean to that. I want to just indicate some blue sky, let it bleed together. A few patches of blue here and there, breaking through the clouds. Some clear water to blend those in. Just darken a few areas while it's still wet. Take that out with a clean piece of towel. The sky is now completely dry. While it was drying and it's still damp, I just added just a few streaks of darker grey-blue just to strengthen that darkness, and just left it to it. So sorry I didn't turn the camera on for that, but it literally took me 3 or 4 seconds to do it. Quite happy with the way the sky's dried. It's got that nice depth to it. You know, the eye's led into the distance because these clouds are closer together because they're far away. Okay, I'm just going to paint in this is lavender. I'm just going to use a very weak mix of lavender to paint in the furthest hills. In the distance there are 2 lots of hills, and then there's a sort of a beach area at the front. Because along this side is a long beach, and then a few other beaches dotted along the bay. So I'm just going to paint over the hills with this lavender, which should dry much lighter. Going over all the hills, just leaving the gaps for where the beaches are. The furthest hills will be very faint in the distance, and then the hills in front of those will be darker, but I'll darken those a little bit later. Not being too fussy about this, it's a long way away, so the detail is pretty vague anyway. So this area here, these little stretches will be beach a bit later. I think we'll use some cerulean. I'll mix it in with this lavender because it makes quite a nice colour for the sea in the distance there. and I'll darken this as I come forward. Perhaps a touch of a bit too much cobalt blue there, but that's fine. This is a number 8 Skoda Perla brush. I could use a slightly bigger brush, but it's fine for this. It's not a massive painting, so just carefully paint around the castle. Try and keep it a little bit of a pool there as we go along. I'm going to darken it as we come forward. These areas should dry quite lighter, so I'm just going to add a touch of permanent rose just to darken that slightly. Just as it comes closer to us. The sea always has different patches of colour as it comes toward you, but I just wanted it to be slightly stronger as it's nearer to us. Part of aerial perspective, I guess. There's a little bit of an outcrop of rocks here. This is low tide, so just leave some gaps for that. This area here is quite dark. It's mostly seaweed. Just with a damp brush, I'm just going to lift out a couple of the edges here. And while that's still damp, I'm just going to touch of neutral tint. Just put a couple of streaks of darker water just to break up the flatness. Sort of reflection of the clouds, really. Just going to paint in the mid-range hills now that the furthest hills have died. That's a bit too dark. I'll just water it down a little bit. Again, not being too fussy. It's in the distance and hardly noticeable. I'll let that dry. I can put, there's another line of hills that are closer to us which are much darker, and a few bits of white detail in where there's the odd building, so I'll do that next when that's dry. In the meantime, I'm going to just lift out some of this because it's going to interfere. Piece of clean tissue, always make sure you've got clean tissue. Try that again. Bit of clear water, just lift that out. It's fine. Okay, those areas are now dry. I'm just going to paint in, this is Naples yellow, the lightest light of the beaches in the distance along the shoreline. And same with, this is the lightest light for the castle ruins. This will dry much lighter, but I'm going to paint over pretty much the whole area. I'll be adding the darks a little later when this is drier. But, main thing is to get this in. By the way, this is Saunders Waterford 300 gram, which I think is 140 pounds. High whites, rough paper. I've not used it for this paper for quite a while, but it's always a nice paper to come back to. I try all sorts of papers out, but I quite often come back to the same thing over time. It's been a while since I've used Saunders Waterford, but I've used Bockingford quite a bit, and Bauhong is a really nice paper. It's really rough. If you want a good rough paper, I can recommend the Bauhong papers. Thin out the wash so that it's nice and light when it dries. As I say, this area is full of seaweed as it's low tide, so I'll be going over that using a dry brush technique to try and suggest some texture in the ground and the seaweed. Just going back to the clouds, the thing with clouds is to let them paint themselves if you can. Just get a rough idea of, if you've got a reference, great. I mean, I did this just as from memory, just to try and create clouds disappearing into the distance and getting it. They get, as I say, they get closer the further away they get. But get plenty of water on, put some pigment in, and let them just blend together. Well, that's all dry now, so I'm going to. This is raw sienna. I'm just going to use the side of the brush just to try and pick up, take some of the pigment out, pick up some of the roughness of the paper. Just to try and indicate some of the roughness of the ground. This is a slightly darker mix with a little bit of green added. Mix it together. Just to create a few different colours, a bit of variety. Don't be too fussy. Use the side of, as I say, the side of the brush to pick up the tooth of the paper. This part of the wall is very almost white. I'll come back and add some darker passages in a while. Just trying to get some of the lighter tones in. Bit of variety, doesn't matter. It's ruined walls, so and the area right in front of us here is reflecting a fair bit of light, so I'm just going to loosely scumble that in with the side of the brush. Okay, this is a mixture of jadeite green and cobalt blue, just for these darker hills that are closer to us. This is a mixture of jadeite green, neutral tint and some cobalt blue, just to ultramarine blue I should say, just to give it some real strength. Again, it's I'm going to use the side of the brush and try and pick up some of the texture. The same for this outcrop of rocks here, just keeping it loose and rough. Not too much detail. Just a suggestion of what's there, really. Or maybe add a little bit more darkness in here in places, just to vary the tonal values with the lights hitting it in different places. Just in here it's much darker, so I'm just adding some more darks around the base of the castle. A few hints of darkness here. Using the same colour, I'm just going to darken, take some of the pigment off, darken some areas of the ruined wall here. Again, I just want to scumble, try and pick up the texture. Just going to put in some of the details around the castle wall, where there's a lot of deep dark shadow, where the old openings were in the wall. just an indication of where they are, nothing too specific. And there's quite a strong shadow in this section where the light's hitting the... It's these dark shadows that define the castle wall pretty well. Just soften those a little bit. Some clear water. Gently soften those in. A few more darks along the top where it's in shadow. And a few deep shadows down here. Just helps to define the wall a little bit, and there's quite a hard edge here, which I'll then soften with some clear water. Just to help define the top of the wall there. Just adding a little more dry brush to the face of the castle. There's a few dark areas there. Maybe a little bit over here. It's a bit darker in this corner, I think. Side of the brush, use the texture of the paper again, just to finish off this corner. Try and define the edge here. I've just noticed that the sea has dried a little bit on the light side, so I'm just going to, with a fairly thin mix of cerulean and a touch of ultramarine, just darken the whole of the sea with one wash. fairly gentle. Don't want to disturb the pigment that's already there. Go at the underpainting will show through anyway, so I'll just go over it gently. Careful around the castle. Just to add a little bit more depth to the painting. It's just a little bit on the weak side, the sea. It's always worth taking a few minutes after you think you've finished just to assess whether there's anything you need to change or add. This is a minor thing, but it should pull the whole painting together a little bit better. We'll see when it's dry. Okay, the sea's now dry, and that's made a big difference. It's given me that cool against warm with the sea against the warmth of the castle, light against dark, and it just added a bit more depth to the whole look of the painting. I think it's come out okay in the end, so I'm quite happy with that. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something from this about how to paint clouds and dry brush technique, and please subscribe and hit the notification bell for future videos, and give the video a like if you liked it. And thanks again for watching.